Well, we are right at 4 p.m., guys.
All right, thanks, Taylor. Welcome, everyone, to our Thursday webinar. I would like to welcome you. I'm Liz Perry, president of Crow Canyon. And as we start all of our presentations, I want to open with our land acknowledgement that we acknowledge the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands we work, where Crow Canyon is, and acknowledge that our mission-related work would not be possible at all without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future. We are very grateful. We respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all of humankind. We are grateful to all Indigenous people, and we support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Thank you to our friends and partners. So some exciting news, if you haven't tuned into some of our other webinars this year, this is actually our 40th year as an organization. Some of our key staff right now possibly were not born or were very small at the time that our organization was first founded. We're very excited to be able to really mark this occasion. We mark our origins to 1983, and here as we're entering 2023, we are trying to spend a little time reflecting, of course, on where we've been and where we're going. Our webinar series, the first Thursday of each month, we're going to focus on a Crow Canyon topic or theme, such as Man About Town, Dr. Kellam Throgmorton, who you'll hear more about in a moment. We also, you can visit our website, www.crowcanyon.org. We are having a celebration, lots of activities and a conference, October 11th through 15th this year. You can sign up now. We have some exciting things in the planning stages and some already planned, like the Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo will be a keynote speaker. There will be other things to come. So I really hope to be able to see some of our old friends and meet some of our new friends at this conference. Thank you. So many of you make donations every time you sign up for a webinar. Many people made donations for Kellam's webinar. I noticed perhaps a family member or two. Thank you very much for contributing to Kellam and to all of us here. We are almost entirely supported by philanthropy, by fundraising, by our endowment. Also by grants. We do have some of our costs recovered by some of the tuition for our programs, but really most of what we do is supported by people like you, by all of our partners who participate in and believe in the work that we're doing here at Crow Canyon. So thank you so much, and please continue to support us and join us in our mission activities. Just a couple of our usual intro slides. Please try to use the Q&A instead of the chat for specific questions. You can enter them anytime while Kellam's talking, and we will get to them during the Q&A period. Sometimes things get lost in the chat. If you're not already on Facebook and you're having troubles with the Zoom, you can go to crowcanyon.org/Facebook, and we will also be on YouTube. Some of our upcoming webinars, A Woman's Role in Hopi Society with Deloria Lomawema, who is a longtime friend and partner of Crow Canyon. Really excited for Dee's talk next week. And then another local scholar, Dr. Amarina Lee Martinez, is going to be talking about Colorado Ute history and colonial land and water appropriation, huge topics here in the West, on Thursday, March 23rd. Taylor wanted me to remind everybody that we are not going to have a webinar on Thursday, March 16th. We will be having a board meeting that week, so we're skipping that week so that we can focus on updating our board of trustees as to how we're doing. Without further ado, very excited that our first Thursday talk is with our very own Dr. Kellam Throgmorton to talk about the program that he did with the assistance of some of you, our program participants. And Dr. Throgmorton completed 22 acres of survey in the Hawkins Preserve south of Cortez last year. And Kellam is going to give a summary of prior investigations at the Hawkins Preserve and some of the preliminary results from our recent work. based on the 22 acres surveyed to date, about 1/6 of the total preserve. There have been a surprising range of site types present, reflecting the use of the locale by Pueblo, Ute, Navajo, and Euro-American peoples, which is one of the things I love most about this area, is just the deep time, depth, and cultural diversity that we find anytime we set foot on the landscape. If you don't already know about Kellam, he has worked in the Southwest since 2005. He is our field director here at the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. His research interests span the Four Corners, with particular emphasis on the Pueblo I period, the Chacoan world, and the period of European colonization in the region. We are so lucky to have Kellam personally and professionally at Crow Canyon, and I would be remiss if I did not point out that he is also an expert in kippers, in music, and is just generally a wonderful Renaissance scholar and human being. So thank you so much, Kellam, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Liz. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be here giving a presentation on this topic. I realize this is one of our few opportunities this year where we're sharing some of the results from our field work. And I think you're all going to be very surprised at what we've found out there. I know I certainly was. So I'm going to queue up my screen share here and just get that moving for you. Let's see. And how does that look, Taylor?
I don't have any screen share coming on just yet, Kellam.
Okay, let me try that again. How about now?
All right, we can see it now. I'm on a map of Cortez. There we go.
Perfect. And hide that little panel. All right, well, without further ado, I would like to kick things off here. Local partnership, regional impact. This is all about the survey and site documentation that we've done out at the Hawkins Preserve. Now, Hawkins Preserve, many of you have probably been there if you're tuning in locally. Many of you may not know, it's at the sort of southwest edge of the city of Cortez. We've got a little map here showing where it is relative to the Lakeview group, where the Haney site's located, where a lot of our field work has occurred. But this was a slightly different idea for a project. We wanted to do a survey-based project. And as you'll see in a moment, this really presented a great opportunity to work with other members of the Cortez community. So why did we choose to conduct a survey in the Hawkins Preserve? Well, what really initiated this was the range fire that happened back in 2021. A fire started down by the baseball fields, burned right up McElmo Canyon and partially into the Hawkins Preserve. So most of the floodplain and part of the southern portion of the preserve actually burned. And grass fires, they're sort of a double-edged sword, where they do damage to archaeological sites, certainly damage the plant communities, but they also reveal a lot. I want to say up at Mesa Verde, they had a couple of terrible fires about 20 years ago, but it also practically, 50% more sites were found as the tree cover and grass cover went away. So the fire presented an opportunity to go out and assess the condition of the archaeology and see what impacts had been created by the fire. But it also just sparked a general interest in updating the archaeological survey information. Well, I see I got the date wrong there. The last time this was surveyed was in 2000, so 22 years ago was the last time that any focused archaeological survey had been done in Hawkins. Now, this preserve is owned and managed by the Cortez Cultural Center. You can see their building here. This is just down on Market Street, which, shoot, I can practically see this from my house here. They manage the Hawkins Preserve. They also have a variety of educational literature available on the archaeology, history, and culture of the region. They sponsor dances, Indian dances throughout the summer. So if you're a visitor to the area, this is a great place to stop by and get a sense of what the Cortez region has to offer. But as I mentioned, they also manage the Hawkins Preserve, which was donated to the city of Cortez in the 90s by Jack Hawkins, and was later acquired and managed by the Cortez Cultural Center. It's also managed as an easement by the Montezuma Land Conservancy. So part of the management plan when this land was donated and taken into conservation was that it was supposed to have programming on educational outreach, on the plant communities, on for recreational purposes, to preserve the cultural resources, but also interpret them for the public. It was really donated. The donor intent was for the public good of the community of Cortez. And as we began thinking about a partnership with the Cortez Cultural Center, we realized that we had a great opportunity to realize that intent that was placed into the management plan for Hawkins Preserve. So our idea was to create an archaeology research program. Crow Canyon runs an ARP program every year. And the idea was to create one of these programs focused on Hawkins Preserve that would also give us an opportunity for intern education and training, so that our interns, and we have 4 field interns every year, 4 lab interns as well. And this was an opportunity to give them some real world training in survey and in working with members of the public. It's important for the interns to get experience in survey because that's actually a large part of what careers in archaeology, if you're in contract archaeology, that's a lot of what you're going to be doing. So we wanted to make sure that they had the opportunity to do that with some of the most recent technology that's out there. Here's a good view of the Hawkins Preserve overlooking McElmo Canyon. We made sure to get this right after it had rained, so it's nice and green. Although that does mean that the weeds are something to be contended with. And as we set out on this, what was really running through my mind was thinking, what can Hawkins Preserve teach us about Cortez? If the idea here of this project and of the preserve is that it's meant to be a resource for the community, both for enjoyment, recreation, but also education, and just to be kind of thought-provoking, to provoke introspection on this place. What can we learn about the Hawkins Preserve, and what can it teach us about life in Cortez? And so a big part of that is what makes a place significant. Now, this is both a philosophical question, but it's also a very real question. If you're me and you have to fill out the state site forms, there are distinct criteria for what makes a site significant. That means, is it something we have to pay attention to if there happens to be some sort of development, or is it not? So how you choose to make something significant has a big impact on the outcome of what will happen to that site and what will happen to that place. Understanding significance, context is key. So that both means the context of the artifacts and the features at the archaeological site being where they used to be and intact, but it also means understanding what is the bigger context, the regional context, the historical context into which these sites fit. So what I realized is we needed to set out and create a context for the Hawkins Preserve. What do we already know about this part of Colorado that will help us interpret the archaeology that we find and convey to us that's the significance of the sites that are out there? So the first third or so of this talk is actually going to be developing this historical context for the Hawkins Preserve that will then allow us to interpret the sites that we've recorded so far in the 22 acres that we've looked at. So at a landscape level, if we think about the quote unquote prehistoric archaeology, which is a big part of the focus of the work that we've done throughout Southwest Colorado, here you can see Google Earth image. There's the Hawkins Preserve approximately. It is right in the middle of a very large ancestral Pueblo community. Just off to the southwest is what's called the Maxwell community, based on the property that it's located on. And it is just across the canyon from Mitchell Springs, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, site complex with features dating from Basket Maker 3 all the way up to Pueblo 3. And in the surrounding area beyond these, most of which is private land, just from access through various projects, landowner access, allowing people to go out and look at the sites. Dave Dove has really been instrumental in understanding some of the sites that are on private land. We're right in the middle of a very large ancestral Pueblo community. I mean, we're talking at least 100 habitations out there. And just to give you an idea, this is the Maxwell property. This was mapped by Woods Canyon Archaeological Consultants back in, I think, the later 90s. Just outside Hawkins Preserve, there's like 15, 20, 30 room blocks or something like that that are in the Maxwell community. Mitchell Springs, right next door, has an enormous amount of archaeology as well. So taking this into consideration from the perspective of the ancestral Pueblo archaeology, we're working in essentially the backyard of these two very large communities, and we were expecting to see unit pueblos, but also the kinds of things that happened in between those habitation sites, the kind of backyard areas where people are spending their time hanging out every day, using these for resource procurement, for places to just go and work on craft activities, to spend their time walking back and forth to visit friends. We're getting that landscape level picture of the place. Now, the so-called prehistoric contexts are actually relatively well developed for Southwest Colorado. I want to say there's like a tome that's probably this thick that is the prehistoric context for Southwest Colorado. And a lot of the work that Crow Canyon's done over the last 40 years has addressed that. But the historic context for Hawkins Preserve, the Cortez area, is relatively lacking. This was the part that we didn't really know going into the Hawkins project. So I'm going to fast forward a lot here to about AD 1700 and try to convey this historic context that will help us interpret some of the archaeology that we encountered in Hawkins. And my disclaimer is that this is a view of Southwest Colorado from someone who has spent half their career in Northwest New Mexico. So I am kind of starting from the perspective of someone working in the Chaco area and looking northward and saying, well, what does Southwest Colorado look like if you're from the perspective of being 50 or 60 miles to the south? As a consequence, a lot of this is going to be weighted towards the Navajo, the Diné archaeology of the region. That's not to say that the Ute archaeology of Southwest Colorado is unimportant, but I felt that the Navajo archaeology was perhaps less developed as a theme, as a context for the area we're working. And so I really wanted to give a context of the 18th and 19th century in Northwest New Mexico in the Four Corners. It is an incredibly culturally complex place. There are Ute, Paiute, Comanche, Jicarilla Apache, Plains Apache, Navajo, Spanish, Mexican, New Mexican, Pueblo, Genizario, United States and American, and even French nations have had an impact on the archaeology of this place, whether directly or indirectly. While in many ways the colonial powers of France, Spain, Mexico, the United States may not have directly entered the region, although as we'll see that there were in fact direct impacts from those colonial encounters. We can't think of it as being existing in isolation. Things that are happening in Santa Fe are affecting people in Abiquiu, or affecting Utes living in southern Colorado and northwest New Mexico, or affecting Navajo, Paiute populations over into the Four Corners. It's not as if people weren't aware of the things going on. And many of you might be familiar with some of the deeper historical context, looking at the Spanish entrance to the area in the 1598, early 1600s. I'm kind of passing beyond that just to focus on some of the more directly, the areas more directly impacted by colonialism. But in that era, we've also got to think of this as decentralized nations. I mean, we might call it the Spanish Empire, but the province of New Mexico was the far, far end of the Spanish Empire. You really couldn't get any farther from Madrid as being in Santa Fe. And as a consequence, a lot of the things that went on are decentralized, not directly under the control of Spain and later Mexico. That also goes for the native groups of the area, where we say the Ute, the Navajo, but these are groups that are often organized more at the level of a band or even at an extended family level. So it's difficult when you say the Navajo and the Spanish or the Mexican government is trying to work with a single individual who speaks for the entire Navajo community or the entire Ute tribe, when in fact they might only have authority to speak for certain members of that group. So that's one of the levels of complication here, this decentralization. The entire period can kind of be characterized as raiding and trading and ever-shifting alliances related to those two factors. People are coming into the New Mexican colony. They are trading with the Spanish, with the Mexicans. Comanche and Ute people might even be trading with the French out on the plains in the 18th century. And the ability to trade was an incredibly huge factor in the way that these alliances were formed. But that alternates with periods of raiding, where people are coming and stealing livestock. And in particular, there's a trade in humans. There's a lot of captive taking involved in this world in the 18th and 19th centuries that affects the way that groups of people were experiencing these places. And the complexities of this, just to give one example, in the 1780s, the governor of New Mexico, the province of New Mexico, was Juan Bautista de Anza. He was a very savvy politician, but he was attempting to form a peace with the Utes and the Navajos. And to do so, he was trying to coerce the Navajo into turning against one of their traditional allies, the Gila Apache. And to get them to do that, he was threatening direct military intervention, but also depriving the Navajo of the right to trade with Spanish settlements and to deprive them of flocks of sheep and places to herd them. But it was complicated for De Anza because the Navajo and the Ute didn't always get along, but the Spanish were trying to create treaties with both of them and the Comanche. The Utes were not exactly interested in being friends with the Comanche. So it's this incredibly complicated political world that starts in the Rio Grande Valley, but is having repercussions all the way into Northwest New Mexico, Northeast Arizona, the entire Four Corners. It's easy to see this as just the Spanish playing everybody off of one another, but you could just as easily see Utes playing the Navajo off the Spanish off the Apaches, Navajo headmen advocating for their own particular band. Very complicated world. And as I said, those are the indirect impacts. This is sort of the direct moments where we have Spanish, Mexican, and US intervention in the region. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's just to say that these are expeditions mostly led by the military that passed directly through the Four Corners area. Some of them with the intent to create trading relationships, others with the intent to conduct raids, and a lot of them were for taking captives. And this is some great pictograph panel out of Canyon de Chelly, showing some of these Spanish entradas deep into Navajo territory in the 18th century. The response to this is a very defensive posture on the part of the Navajo. And as a consequence, you see the construction of these defensive sites. They're called pueblitos. They're best known from the Deneta region. So that's up kind of the upper San Juan, northeast of Farmington, Bloomfield. And those sites date from the late 1600s into the early 1700s. But by the middle 1700s, these pueblitos, these elevated defensive masonry sites, are being constructed further west into the Chusca Valley. And that's why I'm mentioning this, as we're starting to get to a point that's inching closer and closer to the Four Corners, to southwest Colorado. And just to give an idea here, I'm standing near a pueblito near Tisnos Post. So this is northeast Arizona, kind of right by the New Mexico border. And from this spot, this Navajo defensive site, probably built in the middle 1700s, you can see Ute Mountain from the south. You can see Mesa Verde and Tanner Mesa pretty clearly. And just that little ridge over the horizon, over what's called the Aztec Divide, you can see Cortez. So this world I'm talking about of raiding and trading and this kind of culturally complex area, you can see this right from Cortez. We're part of that. And my goal here is to frame the area on either side of the San Juan River around Cortez down to Shiprock as being a porous cultural boundary that has been difficult to discern what that boundary is since the 18th century. to give the further we go forward in time, the more we're able to kind of zero in on the Cortez area in particular. So here's a map that was the outcome of the Dominguez and Escalante expedition. This is made by Don Bernardo Miera y Pacheco. It's an amazing map. If anybody feels like buying me a copy of this, I'm sure they cost millions of dollars. Miera y Pacheco went to great lengths to show cultural differences between groups of people on this map. And he has very specific icons for, say, Pueblos, for Spanish settlements, for the settlements of more nomadic groups like the Comanche and the Ute. He shows teepees. For more sedentary people, he shows these kind of little hut-looking things, these little domes that are the earthen-covered fork-stick hogans. So right there, he shows at the north edge, the lower right circle is showing the northern part of the Chusca Mountains, which is the Carrizo mountain range, just south of the San Juan River. He's got Navajo groups there. Just on the other side of the San Juan River, which on this map is labeled Rio de Navajo, he's got a settlement that says habitations of the Utahs Paiuchis. This is a Paiute settlement, and he's showing the icon for both teepees and hogans. And there at the north end of what he's depicting as Ute Mountain is a group of Utes in almost exactly the location of Cortez. So this sets some of the scene, but also suggests that we've got this sort of cultural fluidity where there's settlements with people, both Navajo and Paiute people living together. Fast forward just a little bit, and we've got this description from a member of the Spanish military at this point, Jose Cortez, no relation to the city of Cortez, saying that the tribe of the Navajo Indians is the northernmost of the Apaches. So the Spanish didn't always differentiate between Navajo and Apache. They've built their places of permanent residence, and he gives a list of them, including Carrizo. So that's that area, right, where I was saying I'm standing in Tisno's Pass and I can see Cortez. That's just over the horizon, this particular group of Navajo people who are in place by the late 18th century. And just to continue hammering home that the complicated cultural milieu that existed here in the Four Corners, including the Cortez area. Here's a list of just citations I managed to find throughout the 19th century. Jose Antonio Vizcarra had one of the biggest Mexican forays, raiding parties coming into the Four Corners. 1,500 men and associated horses, wagon trains came deep into Navajo territory, sent people all the way up towards the San Juan River and the Four Corners. But he consistently attacked Paiute villages, thinking they were Navajo, having a very hard time telling the difference between these groups. There's military dispatches from the Mexican military that says San Juan Paiutes and Navajo people were living together into the 1820s through the 1850s. Throughout that period, there were periodic Ute and Navajo alliances against the Mexican government. And those dispatches say that this was particularly common in the La Plata and Sleeping Ute Mountain area. That's right here, throughout the 1820s and 1840s. Reading through a sort of biography of Louisa Wetherell, and John Wetherell, they ran a trading post over by Kayenta. You got to take this particular source with a grain of salt, but some of the people that she lived with, who would have been Navajo in probably their 70s and 80s in the late 19th century, described periods of Ute raids with people being brought across the San Juan River into the Cortez area. And escaping backward to Kayenta, but also going up into the mountains around the Mancos River to gather medicinal herbs that are needed for particular ceremonies. And the U.S. military describes mixed Ute and Navajo settlements in the area around Cortez in the 1860s. So there's a long history of the Four Corners area, particularly Southwest Colorado, of being this very culturally complex area with Navajo, Ute, and Paiute people all crossing back and forth over the San Juan River and all potentially spending time in the area of Cortez and what would become the Hawkins Preserve. Complicating all of this is the U.S. American intervention into the area, the Navajo Wars, when fields were burnt, livestock were slaughtered, Navajo people were rounded up, and the U.S. had a specific policy of setting indigenous peoples against one another through gifts to one and bringing the military in against others. And many of the Navajo were rounded up, sent off to Bosque Redondo in eastern New Mexico, but many also stayed behind through taking refuge and forming resistance and taking to the hills and also hiding amongst other groups of people. After that 4-year period of the long walk to Bosque Redondo, it was actually William Tecumseh Sherman was the Indian agent in New Mexico, and he greatly complicated everything by telling Navajos that they must live on their reservation, but saying you can also live off the new reservation on unoccupied land as long as they followed the laws of the United States, which basically said go back to the ancestral places you came from, which included Southwest Colorado. And once again, as I said, this is a New Mexico archaeologist looking northward. This is not to say that this is not a place that also has a deep Ute history. I just wanted to focus on a slightly different history that doesn't often get referenced. So moving forward in time, we can start zeroing in more and more on Hawkins Preserve in particular. Now, this is a map from the Hayden expedition, which was a geological, ethnographic, and cartographic expedition that was one of the first to create maps of the Four Corners from the United States. And that circle in the upper left is basically where Hawkins Preserve is, described as Indian farms. And there's also one down on the La Plata River described as Indian farms. So this map was from field work done in 1875. This gives you a snapshot of the area immediately before American settlers began to arrive in large numbers. Zooming in even more onto the area right around Hawkins, Holmes, William Henry Holmes, describes in his journal that when they stayed at this place, they were staying with a Ute group led by Chief Narragansett. And he describes that as they said their goodbye to Narragansett, they passed by the cornfields and damp patches along McElmo Creek, which presumably are Ute cornfields, which our traditional image of Utes is not farming, it's hunting and gathering primarily, but there are places where Utes were growing farms right here, almost a mile, just a mile downstream from the Hawkins Preserve. Now, there's a lot of questions as to whether Holmes, how well did they identify different cultural groups of people, but it's just one more piece of evidence that this is a very complicated place in terms of identities. It also, incidentally, is the first map that mentions the sites around Hawkins Preserve. That tower labeled ruins, that is describing Mitchell Springs. And one of the other members of the expedition, we've got his probably the first written reference to the Mitchell Springs area, where he describes the stream bending northward and running a half circle, a third of a mile across, which this guy was a map maker. That is exactly how far across the peninsula that Mitchell Springs is on, exactly how far across it is. And he describes these the sites that are there, the habitations that are there. Also, more fragments of pottery than any other locality yet visited. Bushels might be gathered. So that's an indication of just how impressive the Pueblo archaeology was at that time. Shortly thereafter, the famed ethnologist Lewis Henry Morgan passed through the area in 1878. He was a lawyer from upstate New York, but one of the first anthropologists, professional anthropologists in the United States. He also describes the Mitchell Springs site, and his map is, he had a consistently tough time knowing which direction was north. You kind of have to rotate this thing about 90 degrees for it to make sense, but this is probably the first map that actually shows us Hawkins. It would have been on the lower left-hand side of this little sketch map. Which brings us up to Cortez. At this period with Lewis Henry Morgan, this is when the first Euro-American settlers are really filtering into the area. Cortez wasn't there yet. What was there was a ranch at Mitchell Springs, which eventually had a post office called Toltec. And the earliest settlements around Cortez were actually down here at the springs, just beyond the Hawkins Preserve. Cortez didn't exist. Mancos and Dolores did. They were primarily ranching communities. And it wasn't until the 1880s that Cortez really began to take root. And it was one of those classic sort of, we plow the land and the rain will follow kind of moments. they decided they wanted to put Cortez up on above the Montezuma Valley with this notion. It must have been very different looking, a grassland as opposed to the sage flats we see today. But the idea was we're going to farm this valley and we're going to form this city of Cortez up above it. Well, the problem is Cortez is about the worst place in Montezuma County to put a town. There's no water up here. All the water is down at Mitchell Springs. It's in the valleys. So the first challenge for Cortez was bringing water to this totally dry valley. A huge canal was constructed in 1886. They actually dug a tunnel underneath. It was nearly a half-mile long tunnel from where Dolores is, under a ridge south of Dolores, to a canal system that stretches for a couple dozen miles all the way to Mesa Verde to water the Montezuma Valley. And off of this, they constructed a flume to actually bring water to Cortez, because they were going down to Mitchell Springs, down through Hawkins Preserve to get their water. And there's some reference, they're selling water 25 cents by the barrel. That's expensive. Inflation, man, it's rough. This flume was on the northeast side of Cortez. 3 mile long, huge wooden construction to bring water into the town. That's important for us at Hawkins because all that water coming into Cortez had to go somewhere. It flowed down a canal that was where Montezuma Avenue is now. It was channeled around and they dumped it all back into McElmo right at Hawkins Preserve. So we can expect to see evidence of that. A big building boom in Cortez occurred in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Most of the stone buildings down on Main Street and other buildings like Calkins here, which has been recently renovated, those were built by a guy named Pete Backstrom. And a lot of the stone buildings, they all went in with about 15 or 20 years of each other. Also going to be pertinent here in a second. Dry farming picks up after about 1910. So canal irrigation is the first real wave of agriculture. Dry farming picks up afterwards. And a lot of the areas northwest of Cortez begin to fill in at that point. And then finally, the real boom moment for Cortez was after the 1950s with uranium prospecting and particularly oil and gas development. The population of Cortez went from like 2,000 to 10,000 in a matter of about a year. All of these things, these different phases of Cortez history, I relate them because the changes in technology and economy and infrastructure can be expected to have an impact on land use and the kinds of features and artifact assemblages that we should expect to see out in the Hawkins Preserve. That's really the whole reason I gave you this long, extended historical introduction, is to say, these are the changes in culture and economy and environment and technology that will impact what we're seeing out there and how we're going to interpret it. We also have some oral histories, so now we're getting directly into Hawkins. Fred Blackburn, tip of the hat to Fred for collecting these back in about 2000. We know that there's coal mines out here in Hawkins that were described, very early ones. Some of the earliest energy resources for Mitchell Springs, Toltec, and early Cortez are being mined right here. And there are shafts and adits that are in the preserve. The irrigation ditches from that flume, they come right through the property. And I've seen several of them out there. We're definitely going to record more of them in the future. There were roads from Cortez that crossed through here. It was one way to get down to the McElmo floodplain. It was how people came to get coal. It's how they came to get water prior to 1890. And it was certainly a place where sheep herding was really common as well. And we've got oral histories of Navajo families herding sheep through here in the 19-teens, 20s, 30s, probably into the 40s as well. Also have oral histories from Clyde Benally, a local Navajo scholar, who describes throughout this early 20th century period that was just so full of economic hardship for everybody, but particularly the native communities, that people really had to band together, and many were working as cattle and sheep herders, not as partners with the white settlers, but as people involved in wage labor. They were working for these folks. So when we think about sheep herding coming through here, it's not just families bringing their sheep, it's people working for other families bringing their sheep through. And we can expect to see archaeology from that out here, including things like sheep corrals and sheep camps. So that's wrapping up the historical overview, and don't fear, we are going to be getting into some actual archaeology here in a second. But I always like to give a shout out to the people who helped with the project before I get to the end, so I don't forget to do it. The work we did out there really wouldn't have been possible first without the Cortez Cultural Center, and Rebecca Levy being instrumental in that, director of the Cortez Cultural Center. Also Bruce Bradley and Fred Blackburn, who did some of the early survey work there in 2000. That's the last archaeological project out there. Dave Dove, who's done a lot of work in the region surrounding it and let us come out and take a look at Mitchell Springs with some of our participant groups. Our staff members, got to say thank you to them as well, instrumental in getting this done and helping develop some of the survey methods that we used out there. And thank you to the Archaeology Research Program participants. This is the first year we did this. I know a lot of you are on here tuning in, watching this presentation. So once again, my hat is off to you. I appreciate you kind of being the guinea pigs for a very new program that we've developed. And I very much appreciated your feedback on what went well and what didn't. And I also appreciate the work you did. And the next part of this is where we're going to highlight that work and its outcomes. Oh, also, for posterity's sake, since this is going up on YouTube, I wanted to make sure that my sources, my bibliography for the research I did for this historical overview is included right here. There was a fair amount of reading, and this way people in the future will know that I'm not just making this up. So there are a number of previously documented archaeological sites out in Hawkins. The prehistoric sites, and I'm using the terms that go into the state database here, they tend to be located on the deepest soils. And so there were a couple of Pueblo II habitations, room blocks. Hawkins Pueblo itself is one of the largest ones, and there's already interpretive trails to it. But a variety of other types of sites were recorded out there as well, lithic scatters, camps. The escarpment and the floodplain also is a focus for some of the prehistoric archaeology. The historic sites, there's a few that have been recorded. There's a coal mine complex with a crib log wagon road. There's a lot of activity in the northeast part of Hawkins, and that's because there were a couple of established homesteads just beyond there. And also that's where a lot of these irrigation canals were dumping water into the preserve, and there's stock tanks and associated infrastructure there. As I said, there's mine shafts and adits, and there's wagon roads associated with those. So we knew going into this that there were at least some historic resources. And I want to say there were about 14 previously recorded sites in Hawkins. Now, for the ARP program, we had people who were on the program, participants went through getting a cultural historical overview where sort of the basic culture history of the region of who was here, Pueblo people, Navajo people, Ute people, the historic period. What can you expect, and what sort of background do you need to go out and do the work out in this area? We also provided some education and training on artifact identification and analysis. So here's our lab staff going through sherds, flaked stone. How do you document this stuff when you get out into the field? We taught survey methods. So we did a couple of trial runs out by the Pueblo Learning Center, pin flagged out some sites, said, here's how you walk in a straight line with a compass, with a GPS unit. Here's how you cross a fence line. The idea being, we're going to give you a little bit of a taste of what's going to happen before we get out there, and it really counts. And so after 2 days of orientation and training on campus at Crow Canyon, participants headed out to Hawkins itself and began conducting the survey, which involved walking in lines as straight as possible through the woods, over the bedrock, and identifying artifacts and potentially sites. And here's another shot. Sometimes the field work's a little bit more reconnaissance in places where you can't walk in straight lines, such as down below the escarpment. Now, once sites are identified, the field work involves recording, getting down and actually documenting the artifacts and the features. And also the important part is taking lunch. For me, as everybody knows, I'm a big fan of eating canned sardines, and I was grateful that people actually let me be part of the group and not have to go sit on the other side of the vans. So what have we found out there so far in the Hawkins Preserve, and how can we fit it into this larger historical and archaeological context that we have for the region? Well, one of the first sites we recorded was this one, which I know doesn't look like much, but it kind of got our feet wet. And something else I noticed is there was an incredible amount of prickly pear cactus on this. Changes in vegetation are also important and tell us something about the kind of land use. This prickly pear likes to colonize places that have been significantly trampled. So we might have some evidence of sheep and cattle being pushed through here. And that is why we have you do some of those vegetation documentation on the site forms. Part of this site had a feature of burned rock scatter and some flaked stone debris. But I think some of the more interesting stuff for me was some of the oldest historic artifacts that we had out there was part of an amethyst glass bottle. It was mouth blown, a cup bottom mold. So I've got a picture down there showing how one of these bottles would have been manufactured. Basically, they're pulling glass out of a furnace. The bottle maker is blowing through the tube to fill the mold with the glass. The mold itself is clamped usually by an apprentice. I don't know, this is pre-20s, so that kid's probably like 12 for all we know. And then other members of the team will pull the bottle out, clamp it, while additional tooling is done to the lip and the rim. Now, this is a druggist or prescription bottle. So this is something that a doctor would actually prescribe. You get a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, they're going to give you this medicine in a bottle. And based on the technology involved, the fact that it's amethyst glass, they added, I want to say it's magnesium oxide was added to the glass, supposed to make it clear. When you expose it to sunlight, it turns it purple, and that was most common from about 1870 to the teens. So that gives us a date for this. This could be some of the earliest historical stuff out there. We also had this, an amber glass tooled finish bottle with a patent style lip. It's a patent or extract bottle. So this is patent medicine. This is like the kind of stuff that a snake oil salesman is selling off the back of a wagon behind the freak show at a carnival. Well, maybe not quite that. But we can get a date on it because they used a very specific implement to make the lip and the neck on this. So there's a picture of a device for creating this tooled finish. As they pulled the glass bottle out of the mold, they would have taken this tool and spun it around the neck of the bottle. And we can see the evidence of that on the little striations on the neck of this. Great to get a good date on that. We recorded a couple of sites that had groundstone artifacts and a few sherds and flakes. This is that kind of, you're in the neighborhood, you're in the backyard of Mitchell Springs and the Maxwell community. This gives us a good sense of what people are doing between the habitation sites. And that there certainly is some plant processing going on out here, and that these items are being left outside here. They're not being carted back to the habitations, but they're remaining out here where the activities took place. Also recorded a feature that's probably associated with a wagon road. I'm sitting on the wagon road. I didn't notice the wagon road. It wasn't until like the last day we were walking out, and I want to say it was Roger turned around and noticed this thing. We'll have to record that next year. But certainly one of those roads associated with getting coal, timber, and other things out of Hawkins Preserve. Steve's crew recorded a very cool little bedrock mortar. In some parts of the Southwest, these are associated with processing plant foods like mesquite pods. Not so much up here. They're rare as sort of economic subsistence features, but they do often occur in the vicinity of really big sites, and we don't fully understand what's being done with them other than that they often are almost like landscape features. And something I noticed going through the site forms was that this particular bedrock mortar is located almost due north of an area that previous surveys have identified as grinding areas, which are also often not just associated with maize grinding, but they're part of the larger landscape where people are marking out sort of, here is the more of a ritual landscape surrounding a village. And it is just directly above one of the largest Pueblo 1 room blocks at Mitchell Springs, that kind of gray fuzzy part at the bottom of the screen. I mean, I might be reading too much into this. We haven't been over to the grinding areas. I tried to do some recon there, and there's still about 3 feet of snow at the moment. So that'll have to wait till this next season, and we'll get some confirmation on what this might be. One of the really cool sites was a quarry, a historic stone quarry. So once again, this is where the infrastructure of Cortez, the construction of all those stone masonry buildings, is probably having a direct impact on the land use and what people are doing out at Hawkins Preserve. So this map shows that there's both a room block and a rubble mound that I'll get to in a minute down at the south end, but we have these two quarry areas where we're seeing waste rock associated with splitting this stone out. There's actually a wagon road associated with getting it out of the site that we haven't recorded yet. That's for this coming season. And those sites, what they look like is this. We've got the little escarpment, and where this sandstone is calving off, that's where you see these big slabs being split away from the bedrock and broken into pieces with metal tools. And most of the stone we're seeing is probably the waste rock that's been left behind as the usable quarried stone is taken away. Here's a couple more images, a close-up of one of those slabs. You can see the vertical and horizontal lines on that one on the left. Those were created with a metal tool where it's being scored in preparation for wedges to be driven into it and hit with mallets to split that out. And Steve Copeland and I were actually just talking earlier today of going, well, what can we do with this? Can we actually trace some of this stone back to buildings in Cortez? Can we look and see, like, this is the size of stone block they were trying to create? Do we see that as being a size of stone in some of those buildings down on Main Street in Cortez? As I mentioned, Pete Backstrom built a lot of the stone buildings in Cortez, although he had his own quarry. It was over by Keach Motors, kind of on the far west end of Main Street. Was he using this quarry? Was this stone that was just being used for people's houses? Who's actually taking the stone out of here? And what does it tell us about the sort of the economy of Cortez? Is Pete paying people to come out and do this as the person who owns Hawkins Preserve at that time, quarrying it? Open questions. And there actually is some archaeological work we can do to confirm some of those questions. Also, there was this rubble mound, a Pueblo rubble mound and pit structure hiding in plain sight right in the middle of the quarry. This had never been recorded before, and neither had the quarry. And here you can see some of us mapping. There's a pit structure depression right in front of us. So this site was just hiding in plain sight. I'm sure I'd walked over it once or twice. But great that, we're increasing the size of that community that surrounds Mitchell Springs and the Maxwell community, one room block at a time. And so that leads us to one of the sites we recorded on session 1, the very first session. Fairly big site. A lot of it is artifacts that are coming down from upslope from part of the Maxwell community. It also has some recent debris on it. Trash probably from the 1970s or 80s. Looks like people were camping on the site in the 60s or 70s. Definitely have some little 22 shells that are from the 40s through the 60s. So a lot of use in the recent, relatively recent past, but it had a couple of unusual features as well, which I'll get into here. Feature 6 and 7 is a rock alignment. You can see it. It's that rock alignment. There we go. Feature 6 stone alignment, rock cluster up there at the kind of central upper part of the picture. Here it is on the ground being measured out. These lines of stones, relatively similar sized rock with a lot of lichen on it, laying fairly embedded into soil where soil exists. Deflated down onto bedrock in other places. This was one that was a little hard to characterize right off the bat. So this is one of those cases where we record what we see and then we think about how to interpret it. We also had these two little very subtle rock features, just so you can kind of see where I'm talking about. These ovals kind of highlighting the edges of this. Roughly circular clusters of rock with a cleared space in the middle. These are consistent with what I have seen as either little brush wickiup or teepee ring foundations in Utah. And we're not talking about big teepees that are 20 feet tall. These are very small kinds of structures, usually temporary ephemeral structures associated with various kinds of campsites. with the rock being used to either hold down some sort of hide or canvas, or even just to secure brush and poles into place. And these things are just about the size that one person could probably fit in here. So these are possible structures just based on evidence from other areas around the region. We also got down into one of these alcoves just on recon. Now, this isn't on this site. This is just down below the rim. And notice that there appeared to be layers of animal dung down under the escarpment below this site. Some of you probably heard me talk about this. My colleagues are probably sick and tired of me asking all sorts of questions about, well, do you do 4-H? What happens when you leave a bunch of goats penned up for a while? Does it start building up a mat? The answer is yes. You get this stuff called pen packing. And so we're wondering if these fragments are pen packed poop. And going back to that historic context, Lewis Henry Morgan, I went back to his original journals, not what was published, but some of his original journals had been circulated. And he describes a alcove about a mile from Mitchell Springs in McElmo Canyon. At the upper end of it was a corral for animals, and there were layers of manure packed into there. And he seemed to think that local Navajo families would probably know something about why that was there. This is interesting because if these pen-packed dung mats had accumulated by the 1870s, it would seem to indicate that this happened before the first Euro-American settlers in the Montezuma Valley, which is a fascinating and open question. So one thing we want to know is what can we do with these features, this, I don't know if you'd call them artifacts exactly. We also had a couple of projectile points, one of them from that alcove down below, that's on the left. The point base on the right was from that site with the weird rock alignment. These are a little hard to characterize, and I'll describe more about that here in a second. But considering how few diagnostic artifacts are remaining out at Hawkins, I consider it a minor miracle that we identified these on survey. So once again, hats off to participants for having a keen eye. Points are great because they give you both a bit of cultural and chronological information, and there's not a lot of chronological information out there on some of these sites. So returning to this as a whole, we've got this strange rock alignment. We've got these two possible structures, a couple other ancillary features, these earthen mounds, a cairn. We've got these alcoves down below that were described in the 1870s as potentially having corrals and animal dung associated with them, and perhaps a little remnant of those pen packing dung mats. I talked with a colleague of mine, a fellow named Dr. Wade Campbell. He's a Navajo archaeologist at Boston University. And his dissertation does both ethno-historical work and archaeological work on Navajo pastoralism. He's kind of the guy for Navajo sheep herding. And his descriptions of some Navajo sheep camps is they tend to be the opposite of what Euro-American sheep herders do. The summer camps, rather than being way up in the mountains, are located down on lowland valley margins, well-watered places, but down low, like McElmo Canyon. And that the winter sites tend to be a little further up into the mesas where there's pinyon and juniper. Firewood for the winter is the key consideration, and that tends to be where the hogans are, the more permanent habitations. The summer habitations are down low, and they have these really ephemeral structures that are usually just windbreaks and trees, conical summer brush shelters held down by rock, twin poles for tents. These little structures possible structures we recorded, they kind of fit into the category of, yeah, that might have been a temporary habitation for summer use. Corrals often have stone foundations. I know foundations might be too rich of a word, but stones are used to hold down brush corrals that are meant to keep sheep contained. And some of them are, usually they're built with like an array of local materials. So wood, in historic sites, I've seen, even car parts and pieces of hog wire fencing, whatever happens to be around. But sometimes with these vegetation ones, rock alignments are used to secure those corrals into place. things that are not unlike this. You read through descriptions of some 18th century sites in the Deneta region, and they often have these 4-meter long rock alignments of fairly similar size stone, rock alignments between boulders walling off particular areas for these sheep corrals. And we're not talking like big sheep herds. These are not the 5,000 herds of sheep of the 20th century. These are 5, 10, 15 sheep of a single Navajo family. Now, going back to the projectile points, compared these with some Navajo style projectile points, these historic, late protohistoric, historic point types. Upper left is Gobernador phase points from a site called Morris 1. The lower right is Piedra Lumbre phase projectile points from another Deneta area site, the Cerrito site. The points that we've found out there close to this site could fall into this category. People have asked, say, the one on the left sure looks protohistoric. It's just at the upper end of the size range of some of these Navajo style projectile points. If that one on the right is actually a side notched point with a concave base, it could fit into this point style. Now, the thing is, these are not diagnostically Navajo. Practically every native group in the Western United States was making projectile points that resembled this after about 1400 AD. So this alone doesn't give us any sort of cultural indication of who's here. And as I mentioned in the context, it's actually going to be very hard to pin down any cultural affiliations, and that might not even be the most important thing. What we're learning is that this place is full of a wide variety of groups of people throughout time, and that it's proving to be one of the question of identity is something that the archaeology can address for a time period where we haven't really addressed that. We need to keep looking at this, comparisons with other sites, with other assemblages. But since this is all we have, this is what we're going to work with. And then going back to this alcove area that has the possible dung matting in it, one of the signatures of early Navajo pastoral sites in the Deneta include these rock shelters where sheep have been penned up with a corral around them. And when you pen up animals for a long period of time, they do build up these mats of dung, sometimes many feet thick. I've seen some of them where it's 2-3 feet thick. It is a non-renewable resource, though, because this also makes great fuel for fires. And so this little tiny remnant that might be in here is suddenly become very fascinating to me, as my poor colleagues at Crow Canyon know, as I've brought around little fragments of it and said, give that a sniff. Does that smell like sheep poop to you? We could probably do a lot with this. We could potentially AMS date these organic deposits. We could reconstitute them in water and understand some of the plants that may have been consumed, try to get an identification on these. First of all, confirm that it is in fact animal manure. There is a surprising amount of data potential from this kind of deposit. And as I said, there's very little of it left. It's very precious. And lest people say, Kellam, you're just trying to turn everything into a Navajo site out there, we have identified on reconnaissance some definite Ute features, this pictograph. It's going to require some consultation. This is one of the most exciting things I've seen out there. The upper left image is the natural color. I used a program called D-Stretch to bring out some of the contrasts in the pigment. So we've got a bichrome pictograph. This thing's about 2 feet across, really incredible. It's been thankfully avoided by the copious amounts of graffiti that are down on these rock shelters. People seem to have really respected this thing over time, which I'm thankful for. So we're hoping to learn more about this as well, to help us contextualize some of the definitive Ute presence out on this landscape. So moving into what have we learned? The whole goal here was to say, what can Hawkins Preserve teach us about the Cortez area? Well, one thing I learned is you can learn a heck of a lot on 122 acres. We're only 20 acres into this thing and a little bit of reconnaissance into some other areas. And we're already filling in the entire historical period on this, from the Pueblo period all the way up to the recent historic, and possibly even identifying some sites from a very hard to a period of time that is not particularly well represented, this 18th, 19th century period prior to Euro-American settlement in Southwest Colorado. As I said, this is a time period that is culturally quite complex, and the archaeology has the potential to address some of those questions of identity, land use, just what is going on in this hinterland of New Spain, this hinterland of Mexico, this hinterland of the United States, but a homeland to the people who are actually living here and dealing with that colonial moment. As I said, whilst a hinterland, this is the place that people lived, and we can look at what the impacts were of that process. It's a very culturally complex area, more so than I even expected. And there's greater than anticipated research potential out here. I'll be honest, I went into this going, what could possibly be left in one of the most visited recreation areas of Cortez that has had people on it picking stuff up probably since the 1870s? Well, the answer is there's a heck of a lot out there, from the Ute, the Navajo, and the settler archaeology, in addition to all of the ancestral Pueblo archaeology. It's also taught me that we have to have a really expansive view of the human history of this part of the county, Montezuma County. We need to bring especially the Ute, Navajo, and early settler archaeology into the conversation. It's part of the landscape, it's part of the history, it's a big part of learning about Cortez. And I think it also shows us that these kinds of local partnerships, like with the Cortez Cultural Center, can be really successful, and that a pedestrian survey program can be really successful. This work would not have been possible without participant input, without the help that you all gave us out there. And I got to tell you, it's greatly influenced my thinking about the Cortez area, and I hope it has influenced yours as well. Future questions to address here certainly need more context and consultation on this possible Ute and Navajo and Paiute archaeology that's out there. As I specifically referenced on that pictograph, need some consultation. There is some low impact work that could be done on a site like that one with the possible corral. You can take soil samples to look for phosphates and confirm whether sheep or other animals have been penned up in an area and dropping manure onto it. We could potentially, if we can determine that that actually is pen packed sheep poop, we can do AMS dating from that. We can get some environmental data from looking at it from a paleobotanical perspective. And I also think we need to gain a much better understanding of the 20s through the 80s. Something that I realized is people spend a lot of time memorializing the history of a place when it's first founded. So Cortez, there's a lot of resources out there for the 1870s to the 1920s. As you move into this era where there are people still alive today remembering the 20s and 30s, it has not been written down as much. I had a very hard time finding good resources, written resources from the 20s into the more recent past. This is where we got to collect oral histories. We got to get out there and get people's recollections of this area to help further contextualize the archaeology of that time period. So if you're interested in this kind of work, we'll be out there again this fall. The Archaeology Research Program, there's going to be 2 sessions in September. You can go to our website and get in touch with us if you'd like to be a part of this. There are still slots available. As I've pointed out here, there is a lot of work left to be done. We've only done 20 out of 120 acres, and we already know of 5 or 6 sites that we need to record that we saw on survey this last year and just didn't get to. So I'd love for you to come out there and join me as we get into the fall. So once again, thank you to the Cortez Cultural Center, staff, interns, participants, everybody who made this project possible. It has been a real unexpected pleasure of mine to get to work with this stuff over the last several months. So thank you very much. And I'm going to stop my share and hand it over and see if we've got some Q&A coming through.
Thank you so much, Kellam, and everyone. wow. And I'm not actually on a beach, but I'm getting a little worn out by snow. So this is why I have this nice water behind me at the moment too, for cheerful reasons. But I want to acknowledge we're a bit over time. I think Kellam, would you be up for sticking around for
Oh, yeah.
5 minutes or so to answer some
Absolutely.
questions? But I want to say, so folks who have to leave, you can always email us for any questions or follow-up you might want to have. And for the folks who were on this project with Kellam, oh my gosh, all of you, Kellam and the participants and the interns and the staff, mind blown, honestly. What an incredible presentation and a contribution to knowledge across all of these different cultures and historical periods. I can't even take it all in right now, but just so grateful and so happy to hear some of the results. And I'm going to jump right into some of the questions from folks because they're awesome, of course. And some of them centering around the first couple ones centering around the colonial period. And I'm going to go ahead and combine two of these, Kellam, in case you want to kind of answer them together. One, which occurred to me too, is how did the Spanish not understand the cultural differences between these tribes when they're very different, which they are, as we know, as scholars and interested people. And the kind of another question related to that is why were the Spanish there at all if there wasn't any water? So if you could kind of address those two, that would be awesome.
Yeah, totally. Just to clarify, Cortez itself was founded by, not by the Spanish, it was founded by Euro-American settlers about 1886. And the reason they put it there, it's that sort of, we're going to sell a bunch of land to people who've never seen it before with the promise that this is, in fact, the new Garden of Eden. The Montezuma Valley must have looked really different in the 1880s. And there was, I mean, you can farm the daylights out of it if there's water. So the idea was if we bring water to it, we'll attract a bunch of settlers and we'll be able to sell a lot of plots of land in Cortez, Colorado. I don't know quite why they wanted to put it up on the hill other than that, you know, we are on a slight rise here in Cortez. Probably just for the sense of being, we're at, you know, the town up above the valley. And there's a great Cortez journal article on why do we call it Cortez? Why do we call it the Montezuma Valley? Rather than go into that long history, because I know I'm already long-winded, I'll just direct you to Google that. Why does Cortez, Colorado have its name? Austin Cope has done a great job pulling that together. As for the Spanish inability to tell these groups apart, the Navajo and Apache languages are very related, and in the 16th and 17th century, they may have been much closer to each other. I think it also depends on who was leading the particular expeditions. It sure seems like Pacheco y Miera and the Dominguez and Escalante expedition, they were good ethnographers. They understood who they were talking to, as you can tell from his map, really distinguishing these house styles associated with groups of people. Vizcarra, who was mostly there to raid, to kill people, to take captives, to burn settlements, and to get sheep, I am not sure that telling the difference between groups of people was the first thing on his mind, and may have not had a lot of experience. But this is a common theme where, you know, you don't see people except in very certain circumstances where you're working through interpreters for the most part. You might have a Pueblo interpreter. One of these expeditions had I think the fellow was from Jemez, but he spoke a variety of these languages. You're often going through an intermediary. And then finally, there is purposeful obfuscation. There's evidence that on the Dominguez and Escalante trip, Ute bands were particularly interested in bringing those people to some places and not letting them go others, and purposefully obfuscating who was on the landscape to, you know, acquire particular trading relations and keep them away from other groups of people they were in competition with. So there's a lot of reasons. I'll leave it at that right there.
Oh, really, really good answer and questions. A quick touch base on the pre-colonial sites and history of the landscape. A couple questions around, I think because there's so much history that we've covered, some of our viewers are wondering how, can you just kind of comment on that pre-colonial occupation? Somebody had sort of asked a little bit about the early Mitchell Springs group and how come there's so much pottery around these settlements. So maybe touch base a little bit on the connection to the pre-colonial sites in this area, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Mitchell Springs is literally right across the McElmo Canyon. We can go stand on the edge and we can see it. If people, there were probably a couple hundred people living there. You would have heard dogs barking, kids crying, people talking to each other. The Hawkins Preserve itself has at least 3, now 4 pueblos on it. So there were people living directly on the preserve as well that were part of that community. And the reason we end up seeing potsherds between sites when it's like, well, here's the habitation, what the heck are these sherds doing all the way down here? It's twofold. People walk back and forth on the landscape and they drop stuff. When you drop a pot on bedrock, it shatters into, well, not a million, but like 60 pieces. So people moving between sites are one way to do that. People using land between sites, we have this tendency to draw a big bubble right around and be like, here's where everything happened. As if people didn't walk 30 feet outside of the line that the archaeologists drew. And a lot is going on in those places between the sites. And that's why taking this landscape level perspective, I think is important. And so people are sitting out there, they are making stone tools, they are repecking ground stone to grind up seeds. We did notice that there's some nice rice grass stands out in some of the cleared areas, particularly coming back in some of the burn patches. And actually it was within the burn area where we really begin to see this kind of like cultural landscape of just everything in between the houses themselves. Where else was I going? Oh, and the third reason you get that is what we call slope wash. When it rains on the soils around here, I have seen potsherds just pick themselves up and sort of slide downhill as the water runs downhill. And so many of the artifacts could be coming from areas immediately upslope where we also have habitations just on the other side of the fence. So that's why we find potsherds all over the place out there.
Awesome. No, thank you, Kellam. It's good connection. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions around sheep and the Navajo occupation. So I think we might be able to get to most of our questions here. So a question around at what point in this history did people start domesticating and herding sheep, and where did they get them from? To kind of tie into that, we had someone kind of mention how did, maybe a little more detail on how the Navajo communities survived with sheep, if that was really their main contact with Europeans, and some of those contacts were brief. So kind of a question of adapting to what was available to them at the time, if that makes sense.
Navajo pastoralism, so sheep herding, was very well established by the middle 1700s and probably firmly established by the late 1600s. Those sheep were acquired from the Spanish, probably through trade as well as through raids. Horses were acquired through raids, particularly for the Ute and the Comanche, by the middle 1600s. Same with, it's a very thorny question of how did Navajo people begin farming and what the relationship is with Pueblo groups. And I'm not going to open that can of worms. I was about to say can of fish. I'm not going to open that can of worms right now, but all these domesticates were acquired in the early colonial period by the 1700s. As Athabascan language speakers, the Navajo are the group that most firmly doubled down on that, but that doesn't mean that other Apachean speaking groups or that the Paiute or even the Ute for that matter weren't engaged in some of that too, as some of the historical research shows, especially in our area. That is such a fluid identity. I'm very curious about that. Now I saw a question on there about the long walk and what did people do with livestock or how did they get them? By that point, Navajo families had built up decent sized herds of sheep. This has been part of their economy for nearly 200 years by this point. They were hiding in many places around the Four Corners, particularly out by Navajo Mountain, but in other places as well. And as you get to know the archaeology, you'll realize that some of the sites are incredibly subtle, located behind boulders, corrals up little slot canyons. I mean, this is not my people. I can't speak to it directly other than to say what I know of the history. It must have been an absolutely desperate time. And almost impossible to fathom those several years of survival in these landscapes. So it was, their crops were burned. It was unable to plant. You're living on whatever you can get off the land and the 5 or 6 sheep that you've managed to bring with you. Incredibly hard scrabble existence.
Wow. Well said. Okay, so 2 left, I think, that we can just cover quickly. One of which I was kind of wondering too, Kellam, because I don't know, is any of that water canal flume feature still standing that you had the cool historic pictures of?
No, they not still standing. By the early 1900s, they built a pumping plant in Cortez and were able to put the water into a canal and pump it. But Steve and I were looking at Google Earth the other day, and I think on the northeast edge of Cortez, beyond Rec Park, you will see that several of the neighborhoods are bent in this weird little arc. These are neighborhoods that went in the 60s. And I think that they're following the canal, like they had to build around the infrastructure of the canal. So I think the city plan of Cortez on the northeast side reflects the location of that flume. Now the Highline Canal, it's still there. It goes right past the Haney site. Parts of it are still used today for irrigated farming. So the larger infrastructure is still absolutely critical to agriculture in the Montezuma Valley.
So cool. What a neat thing to look and see. Oh, I bet they built around that canal. That's no longer there. What really cool observation. So I think we'll finish out with some combination of these last 2 questions around future recording. What can be done to record the remaining areas? Are there overlay photos? Have you done an aerial survey? Are you thinking about doing one? So the last questions, people kind of interested in getting the rest of it recorded, which of course you can join Kellam this summer should you want to jump into some of that recording. But take us home, Kellam.
Well, I would love to fly some drones over there, but we are directly under the flight path of the airport. And we're so close to the airport that the planes are like less than 100 feet over your head. So we cannot get permission from the FAA to fly drones in that area. In terms of quicker ways to record sites, I'm not worried about this stuff disappearing in the next 3 years. There are a few things associated with that possible early historic Navajo, Ute, whatever it is, the site that might predate the Euro-American settlement of the area. I am concerned about that. It's super fragile. I've tried not to make the location of it very well known. That one, I think we need to take action on relatively quickly. The rest of them have been out there getting, they've been getting attention from people for the last 140 years of Euro-American settlement and plenty before that. But to continue, what we're going to do is keep walking. We're using GPS units to map those sites. We're recording artifacts. We've got a recording system set up that allows us to collect the information necessary for the state site form. So it's being recorded up to state standards. If we, some of this we could probably do pole mounted photography. I hadn't really thought of that and not have to deal with the FAA. So there's a lot of options for how we can continue to document these sites out in the field at Hawkins Preserve.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. You wouldn't believe how many people have stuck around an extra half hour to hear this, or almost. Thank you so much. Kellam, spectacular talk, and so many people involved in this wonderful project. And we hope to have more people involved in it this summer. So check out the programs, and we hope to see all of you soon. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kellam.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you,
Learned a
everybody.
lot.
It's good to see your
Okay, take
names
care,
out there.
everyone. Have a great night.